Welcome to Sharks, Snakes and Shareholders, an Innovators Uncensored show where startup founders and entrepreneurs share their horror stories of shady term sheets, toxic boardrooms, and investors you wish you declined. Each week we'll have a new guest, ranging from angel investors and VCs to deal makers and founders, who will rank each of these horror stories on our investor red flag scale. Hosted by ShipShape.VC's very own Daniel Salco.
Hi, I'm Daniel Safko. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ShipShape.VC, a free-to-use investment search engine that enables founders to identify which investors they should be speaking with about the technology that they're building. We're really pleased about this show because it helps founders identify the horror stories that other founders have gone through without needing to repeat the same mistakes themselves. And this week, in our first ever episode of Sharks, Snakes and Shareholders, we have Kevin Smith, so exited founder and now with the new venture Comet. Really looking forward to hearing about your experience and your view on some of the stories that have been sent in today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Great to be here. Looking forward to getting into some of these. Looks interesting. Thank you very much.
I think we will get straight into it. I think as a founder, experienced a fair number of really negative situations that investors have put us into. And just start, I'm going to share some of these as we go in and go through it as well from our own experience. But is there a particular story that stands out to you in terms of what you've experienced in your founder journey to date?
Do you know, I've been quite lucky. I think I've had a few horror stories, a few problems to deal with. One in particular was pretty nasty. London-based fund, which we almost got involved in. Thankfully, didn't. Reminds me a little bit actually of one of the questions that might be coming up. So I don't think it was them, but I've generally been quite lucky. I think I've had good investors, especially with Credus, my last business. Lucky enough to have really good investors that were bought in and backed the management team. So I think I've got off quite lightly overall.
That's very fortunate, and I've having read a few of these, I think some of them are a bit close to home and very sort of parallel experiences to ones that we faced ourselves with a few sort of nuances. Now, this is the first time we're doing this, so I think it's probably worth going through our scoring system. So the format of this show is we've been sent in some submissions, some anonymous submissions by founders about experiences that they've had with essentially questionable investors or investors with questionable behaviors. And we're going to go through these stories. We're going to sort of pick them apart a bit. We're going to go through some analysis, and then we're going to rank them. And we've got a 4-tier ranking system. So we've got an oddball alert, so where something just doesn't quite sort of sit right. We've got backseat founder, so that's our yellow card. And that's sort of, as it says on the tin, when an investor, it sounds like they're going to want to get more involved in the business than you're necessarily comfortable with. We then have boardroom vampire. So those who are going to eat up all of your time in the business and make it impossible to do anything. And then lastly, we have business butcher. And business butcher is essentially where if you accept these terms, the business is dead. And so we're going to go through the different scenarios, and we're going to do some analysis and then assess them.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So first story. An overseas investor committed $500,000 to our funding round, and off the back of that commitment, this business felt that they could push ahead with their growth. And then time keeps on going by. The money doesn't come in, and the overseas investor essentially blames it on the country's banking system. Now, actually, this is very close to home because a very similar situation happened to us. But basically, the investor then goes cold, and nothing happens. And this founder essentially found 15 other founders who were in a similar situation with exactly the same investor, and they were part of a group. And a number of those businesses ended up closing, and this particular founder had to sort of lay people off essentially because ultimately they'd taken on additional burn that they couldn't afford. They were dependent on the investment. So that's sort of founder horror story number one. We'd love to hear your view on it.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? just listening to it, you do wonder if it's actually a real person. And 15 different, I mean, we're not talking like, one or two different businesses and they're maybe just struggling to make a commitment, but 15 different businesses that they made a commitment to. Like you might even think it's like, I don't know, someone's kids hacked their laptop and it's just going around casually on a weekend, a million to them, 500 to them. Almost doesn't seem real, doesn't it? That you can have like 15 different companies on the hook, from the same guy. Either that or some kind of lunatic. It's like waiting to win the lottery, before they then kind of pull the trigger on all these investments they've lined up. Or just someone like kind of ego crazy that wants that kind of kudos and kind of almost people fawning over them as they're an investor, but no intention of actually making good on it. Either way, it's not a good, it's not a good scenario, is it, having 15 different companies on the hook and kind of led them down the garden path to a degree. I think one of the things that's really important, right, is understanding who is investing in your business, like actually knowing this person, who they are, where's their money coming from. Another thing that stands out to me with this one, and this is probably the world I've lived in for the last 7-8 years, but things like money laundering kind of come into question, because who is this individual? How have they got 500,000 here and all this money here, which doesn't actually materialize? Where's it coming from? And I think, when you go through if you go through a credible VC firm, or if you're using like an FCA regulated fund, you haven't really got to worry about that kind of thing. Or if you're using a credible platform where things like AML checks are done for you, that's fine. You haven't really got to worry about that. But if you're dealing with an individual like this who's clearly a bit dodgy, doesn't really have the money, and you really start bringing into question who this kind of person is. And if you get into that territory and start thinking about money laundering or kind of like proceeds of crime stuff, it gets quite worrying, because obviously this guy hasn't really got the money and it's all very sketchy and dodgy. And the whole thing, isn't it, it just screams kind of like cowboy somewhere, not really a professional investor, clearly someone you don't want to come across.
And I mean, this a not dissimilar situation happened to us as a business, and
with ShipShape.
Yeah, with ShipShape, and we didn't find them on our own search engine. It was via essentially it was an introducer network type thing, and this investor was there. They said they were setting up a fund, and funny enough, I don't think it was the same investor, but some of these things read quite similarly. At what point? I now know at what point I would have alarm bells ringing, but having gone through that process. But yeah, when would you sort of, if you were a founder, when would you start having alarm bells? Like what can you put in place mentally, almost like mental tripwires to say, now is actually a point in time where we've got to sort of like say you've got to commit or essentially carry on.
Yeah, it's really tricky, isn't it? Because when you found someone that wants to invest, and it's hard to find investment, isn't it? So when you find someone and they're keen and they've actually apparently got the money, you want to keep it, even if it starts feeling dodgy, you want to give it a bit longer, because trying to find someone else is really difficult. And you can just get drawn. Weeks can become months, months become quarters, and before you know it, 6-9 months has passed. It's really, really hard to have a definitive point in time, isn't it? I think that you have to kind of set a limit yourself. I think time kills deal. I mean, time is the worst for investment. It's whether it elongates, whether it's a slow no or a slow yes. Time elapsing is terrible, because all the time you're not getting investment, you're getting behind, you're not doing the things you should be doing, and things are getting away from you. So I think you've got to kind of really compress that period yourself as much as possible, set pretty firm limits. I think really if someone's offering you investment and after maybe a couple of months, you're really not seeing anything, it's excuses and it's things aren't materializing, I think around that time you have to really start asking questions. And the other thing as well, don't cut all the other options off. So just because someone said yes, unless you've agreed some kind of exclusivity with them, keep other options open as well. I mean, I wouldn't stop looking for investment elsewhere just because some guy overseas has promised £500,000 that you may or may not have. And it's a hard thing to do, because like I say, it's hard to find someone that wants to give you money. And when you do, you want to cling on to it and make it work. But for me, a couple of months, 3 months of really getting the run around, I think you just got to start assuming it's not going to happen. I think at that point, you really start looking elsewhere.
Actually, that's, I mean, definitely guilty as charged in terms of thinking, oh, right, someone has committed funding, like I'm going to take them at their word, and I'm essentially going to discard the pursuit of other options. And definitely something that learned since those mistakes is about competitive tension, helping actually to drive the legitimate actors along, and ultimately getting you a better price, hopefully, and better terms at the end of it. Yeah,
100%. I mean, the thing is, and it's very easy for someone just to say they're going to give you money. It's very easy, isn't it? Anyone could do it, isn't it? Whether they've got the money or not. Do you know what I mean? Most of the time, there's no real checks. There's no one's actually checking you've got the funds. It's just, I'll commit to it. And if you don't know the person, especially if they're overseas, and like I say, maybe it's a bit of paranoia for me, but you start thinking about where the money's coming from, all those kind of things, it's really, really important to, if as far as possible, get to know the person that's investing in your business. Again, not to dwell on the point, but let's say, that money has come from somewhere dodgy. Imagine the reputational damage. It's come from some guy overseas that's got £500,000, doesn't know your business, but has agreed to invest this money, and then imagine the reputational damage if it does turn out to be proceeds of crime or something else. And I think really understanding who you're investing with is really, really important. And if you haven't got that, you're putting so much faith in someone you've never met. They may or may not have the money, and may or may not be dodgy. And I think there's a lot to be said for as hard as it is to go to known VC firms and recognized angels and funds and everything. There is a lot to be said for that, because you don't know who you're dealing with half the time and whether these people have even got the money. And I think putting all your faith in that and making decisions on it we all want to do it because we all want to get ahead, and we all see an opportunity and we want to go ahead with it. But you've really got to think twice before making commitments over someone you don't know. If you really don't know the person, you don't know for certain they've got the money and where it's coming from. Really, really got to be careful.
One of the nuggets of wisdom that really came out from this for me, and despite it's obviously a horrible story, people losing their businesses, lots of people losing their jobs, was around the group chat that this founder had with other founders. What sort of role and would you encourage other founders to sort of go essentially shop around other founders to find out about certain investors?
Yeah, there's no, I don't think, I'm aware of, there's no kind of central site, is there, where people kind of name dodgy invest. Maybe there should be. Maybe someone should create that, because you can save so much time and heartbreak. If there's somewhere you could go, isn't it? Like these 15 people, if there was somewhere they could have gone and just, you got to be careful, I guess. You could end up unfairly tagging quite legitimate investors that did just have delays or reasons they couldn't invest, and naming and shaming just really, really credible people that just had problems. But equally, stuff like this, when you get to the point of knowing it's someone who's a bad actor and they're messing people around, if there was some central place that you could somehow, as a founders community, somehow flag that and save other people potentially their business, isn't it, or months of wasted time. And I don't think it exists at the moment, but maybe it should. Maybe someone should create that, some kind of community.
So I've definitely seen one for VC funds, but obviously VC funds tend to operate more in the light. So Landscape have a review for VC funds, but I also have not seen one around individuals, and I think it's
individuals. I think there's something in that. Again, what they're saying, without unfairly, painting genuine investors in the bad light, there must be some feedback, central way of blocking that. I'd have thought.
Yeah, great. Okay, I think we're now up to the first ranking of this, and I think sounds like we both agreed. For me, it's definitely this is a butcher territory all day long, isn't it? Yeah,
hard to look elsewhere, really, isn't it?
And I think like one of the worst things for me around this was it is the sense of like the promise, almost like being out there but never quite within reach of getting there. Whereas if you get a bad term sheet, for example, you can say no there and then. You've arrived at a quick no. But actually a drawn out.
Yeah, the slow no is the worst, isn't it? It really is, And I think it's that false hope, and you think you've got investment. That's the worst thing. Is celebrating. You've got brilliant, and then like it's the frustration. The person you're dealing with has probably got no intention of ever actually giving you the money. Do you know what I mean? That's the reality, isn't it? If they're dishing out to 15 people, they're probably not intending to actually come through any of them.
Well, and this I think something. So I think there's something in that, right? There are definitely people out there who are trying to raise funds in the background, and they're trying to create that sense of urgency of like, oh, you've got to give me the capital so I can deploy it because I've made all these commitments. I hope that was the case in this instance rather than just bad actor acting from malice. Okay, great. That's number one. We've got two more to go. Okay. So next one. Someone received what they described as a soft term sheet from investors with vague requirements on co-investment. Due diligence was done 4 months later, which is very in depth, and then forced salary expectations on founders, etc. It sounds like the investors refused to use the platform that the founders were using from a diligence perspective. So everything had to be duplicated. They had to go use the investors platform. That's definitely something I've heard before. 3 months later, still no advancement to IC. The co-investment that fund had asked for then came in, and so the founders then asked to go back to the fund and asked to go to the investment committee for 100,000. So not a huge amount. Anyway, the fund then came back with a full term sheet, doubling the size of the round, wiping out all of this company's SEIS, even though the co-investors had come in via or wanted to come in via SEIS. So sounds like the fund wanted to take all of the SEIS allocation, wiping out the co-investors' SEIS allocation. And so that basically meant that this company had to start the whole co-investment process all over again, because they had to find investors that would come in but ultimately invest on worse terms than that fund. The whole process took 9 months. So it's it's a horrible start to life as a business raising.
Yeah, and I mean, it's assuming the process was successful in the end. It's an example of a slow yes and not a very good yes. I mean, you end up with far less favourable terms. Probably like a soured relationship to some degree, and the whole thing has been elongated. And again, 9 months it's a long time to wait, isn't it? Especially if you're early stage and you're waiting for the money. So unfortunately, though, again, it's all too common, isn't it? Things get elongated like that. When you break it down into stages, each months can go by, and it's sometimes things just happen. There's delays, then more months go by, and suddenly you are into 6-9 months. I think in this case, though, it does sound like there's some pretty dodgy things going on there. Going back with some of the things on the term sheet, enforcing salaries, using a different platform, annoying. But that's I get that people have their process, and people can they have a set way of doing things, and they want you to put it. Okay, it's a bit annoying, but I get it. Some of the other things, though, going out and taking all the SEIS, doubling the round size. I mean, yeah, it's not a good place to be, is it?
No, I think the as you say, like the different time that they're having to wait for at each stage comes across as, one, unprofessional, but two, in terms of the way that investor might behave in a future round, particularly around if they try and come in early to set the round terms. Like if they're requiring co-investment again, you might be beyond angel reach, and you might be looking at another fund and the two interacting against each other. So like for me, that would raise alarm bells with regards to, okay, how are they going to behave in future rounds, and what's that going to do to the sort of trajectory of the business?
Yeah, 100%. And everything about that is not something you want to get involved with, is it? Really?
Yeah, but I definitely agree with you on sort of platform expectations. I've definitely seen it before where others have said, look, you've just got to use our system because they've got a process in place.
Yeah, and it's I get that. I mean, that's, people are set in their ways, aren't they? They need to see things in a certain way, and that's what they've got to log in, whatever. Isn't it? It's a bit annoying, but yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's a lot of bad warning signals for the future, isn't it? You're going to probably have to go again. You're going to have to, with those guys involved, everything's going to be more difficult, more painful, more problematic.
And just on the point around like sort of salary expectations for founders, this topic comes up a fair bit where founders might have very high salaries, might have very low salaries, and sometimes sometimes investors can talk salaries up, or more commonly talk them down. Is that something that you've seen in your journey?
Yeah, I do remember once going to an investor. We actually progressed to a reasonable stage, and we sat down and had a conversation, myself and my co-founder at the time, and they told us very clearly we were overpaid. I mean, we didn't think we were. Looking back, it was probably okay, but we were told quite clearly we'd be taking quite a big pay cut, and we wouldn't be getting a pay rise then probably for the next 5 years. And we were on a journey, and it was very locked in and controlled. And again, it's difficult, isn't it? Because depending on what your salary is. I mean, no one wants to see, if you're investing, over a 6-year period, if you've got a high salary, that compounds, doesn't it? So much money can go back out, through salaries, and not just salaries, mind, but people doing consulting, people coming in on fractional roles. You see this sometimes. People come in and they want a high day rate, they want high salaries. And before you know it, a lot of the investment can be given back to that when it should be going into maybe other activity. Equally, it's difficult as a founder because you've got to live, haven't you? And you've got to, you're making sacrifices, and you've got to have something reasonable. I think if you've got a salary in place and you're working to that and you're used to working to it, and that's what you've got in play, I think having something different enforced on you then outside of your control, I think is quite. If you're not taking the mick, I think that's quite a hard one to take as a founder, because you're probably not taking the mick. You're getting something reasonable that the company can afford to pay, and we've all got our commitments, we've all got our outgoings, and if you've got that in place, I think imposing other salaries on people is a hard one to take, I think.
And when that investor tried to enforce a lower salary on yourselves, did they take into account or consideration what your other commitments were, or was it just a sort of blanket like this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, this way, you're overpaid. It needs to be done. And you can look back. If I look back at it, I could probably see their point of view to some degree, but it's not really. You're not taking the mickey. You're not sitting there on hundreds of thousands a year. You've got a living, a working salary. And I think for someone who doesn't understand your situation, doesn't understand what you've put in and what you've set up and how you've managed to structure things to make things work and make a scenario that you can work with and not be, really uncomfortably on the breadline, to just come in and just say you're having a salary, just making carte blanche decisions about it is wrong. And I think it's not productive. It doesn't bring the best out of people. It just gets people's back up, frankly. It did with us. We walked away soon after that. It was just a massive red flag. So.
Great. And was that the red flag that made you sort of walk away?
Yeah.
Amongst others, yeah.
In that same conversation, there was a few things, but yeah, that was one of them.
I may know the investor. Yeah. Okay. That's great. And I think we can go through to a ranking stage now on this one.
So.
All right. Okay. I think I've got mine. I'm going to go with Boardroom Vampire. Yeah.
I'm the same, mate. Going downgrade one from the previous one, but lots of problems with that, isn't it? It's not going to be a good experience.
Yeah. Exactly. Not just for that journey, but the journey ahead too.
100%. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Right. On to our last investor story. Okay. I think this is probably something that a lot of founders will empathize with. We had an investor that wanted to invest a tiny amount in comparison to the rest of the round, but they had one condition. That condition was that they'd be allowed to create a board with themselves on it. However, sort of to sweeten the deal, that investor said that were they to join the board, they would give the founder as hard a time as possible. Definitely received such flattering offers. What about yourself, Kevin?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I remember the phrase. I'm going to make. Genuinely making life difficult, but especially, I do remember one investor who. So, particularly in the context, if you ever wanted to leave, it was the context of how difficult it'd be. It'd make it so painful. Make it literally so painful for you. You won't be able to leave. You won't be able to do anything else. You're going to have to imagine the basis for your relationship with someone, right? I'm going to make sure it's so painful if you want to get out of this or change or do it. Genuinely making life hard is one thing. Making things so painful that it's impossible for you to look at any other options is another level again. And I've definitely had that a couple of times.
Where do you think that comes from in terms of why does an investor think that that's a good thing?
Yeah, it's a control thing, I think, isn't it? I think it's a notion of, and I always have this kind of thing, especially when you go through, and I think private equity isn't great at this sometimes as well. This kind of a concept as a founder, if you're kind of rolling over into another fund and you're going to put some of your equity back in, this kind of concept, you can't have beach money out, it's got to be painful, you've got to have pain money put back in, and it's got to be a real kind of sacrifice for you to leave the business. And I get it because they want you tied in and they want to make sure that, there's a lot of pain on you to do anything different because they're putting their money in. But it's not the best way to get the best out of people. The other thing, in terms of tying someone in for the journey, especially if you go, right, you're going to roll into this next round now, it's a 5-year journey ahead of you. It's going to be so painful if you leave. You've got to stay, right? What that does, it makes it really hard for you to actually leave, even if it's the right thing for the business. So let's suppose, you get 2 years down the line, you're better off leaving and someone better, more experienced, more capable of doing the job coming in because the company's changed. You can't leave because it's so painful for you to leave. You're stuck in there. Do you know what I mean? So what you're actually doing is trapping people in a scenario which is too painful for them to leave, but not necessarily the right scenario for the business. And I think it's quite short-sighted in a lot of ways. Having a scenario which is painful and difficult isn't going to bring the best out of people. It's not going to necessarily end up with the right people in the right places or the right attitude. So if you're a founder and you're on the journey, you don't need someone to come in and make it painful. You're already motivated, isn't it? You're putting all your time and energy into it. You don't need someone to come in and threaten to make it as difficult as possible. What does it possibly add? So
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think this is I don't know in this particular case where the story has come from regionally, but this is something that I've definitely experienced here in Wales. Is that there's a huge, actually the UK in general. There's a huge emphasis from investors, both angel and in many funds too, where there's a focus on preventing value, what they perceive to be value erosion.
Yeah.
They don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
There's almost like they're losing sight of the bigger picture of actually what might be best for the business in a few years' time.
That's the point. It's what's best for the business, isn't it? And sometimes, I used to say this a lot with my previous business partner. The person you need for the first 2 years is kind of different person to what you need for the kind of that growth phase, years 2 to 7. And it's a different person again, leading the ship. When you get 7 years plus, when you get to a certain size, the kind of CEO you need for £1 million turnover business is very different from the CEO you need for a £20 million bit. It just naturally is, And there's a natural off point for most people. There's a natural good exit point where you can have done your role, got to a certain stage, maybe someone better can come in. Not always. Sometimes, some investor or some entrepreneurs, CEOs are there right the way through the journey from very early stage to unicorn status. But very often it's the right thing for the business to make way and let other people come in, or at least change roles, or be able to make equity available, have a partial exit. As soon as you take those things off the table by making it so painful for someone to leave or change, you're really hemming people into a corner. It's not necessarily conducive to having the right team there at the end.
And so how would you go about assessing a potential board member? Like where have you been happy with any sort of board appointments that you've made?
I've always been a fan of boards. I think boards are a good thing. They bring a lot of structure. They impose kind of rigor and natural checkpoints. And having good people on boards that actually bring value is the main thing. There's someone that sits there and challenges and can keep things on the straight and narrow. There's a huge amount of value in it. But someone that's there just to cause pain, or just to think they're there just to challenge everything and just be a pain, that's not bringing value, is it? Value is, half the time it's kind of sitting and listening and just letting people get on with things, but just pointing out, it's gradually steering in the right direction, making the odd kind of move here and there. It's not about going in and trying to control and make people miserable and making a point of imposing yourself on the situation. I think that's what you don't want. You don't want people in it just to impose themselves. You want people thinking about the right things for the business. And often that is just supporting the founders, making the right decisions, but, the small decisions which keep things in the right direction. And that's why I find the most effective boards are. You're not there just to argue. You're there to genuinely look at things, nudge things in the right direction, make the right decisions. You're not there to go in and give the founders a hard time for the sake of it.
And could you, putting you on the spot here, could you think of back into your memory experience around a small input or a small nudge that a board member has given that actually thought, that's a perfect example of what we needed at the time?
Yeah, there's quite a few. And whether that is, what I'm quite a fan of is taking decisions to the board. When having a clear understanding when you take something to the board, even to ratify it or get different opinions on it. Hiring decisions, I think, are really just challenging things like that, because it's very easy to get carried away. Go back to the board and we want to make these additional hires. We want to go outside budget. And just someone sometimes saying no, or let's give it another few months. Let's wait a bit. Small decisions like that around people, because getting the right people is so important. Rushing to get the wrong people because you think you need to fill a role is really damaging. And just sometimes the voice of reason, just to let's think about this. Let's not just rush into that. Let's just take our time on this. Things like that, I think, just cumulatively add a lot of value and prevent a lot of potential knee-jerk kind of movements. So I've had a lot of examples of that in the boards I've been on, which I've been really lucky with, I'd say.
That's great. And I think just thinking about our own experience, very similar in terms of where that sort of the gentle nudging, guiding can be really, really helpful. Yeah.
They're there to actually genuinely keep things on the right path, not just be the loudest voice in the room,
Yeah, and I think, and again, I suppose to the chemistry point, making sure that you like the individual, you like the investor that you bring on board, you think that they can add value. I think it's just such an important piece of advice, because especially in the early stages, it's so easy to be sort of taken off course.
Yeah, 100%.
As investors.
Yeah, and I think that's it's very easy. You want to go in different directions. You see shiny lights, and you want to go in it. And part of the board's job is there to keep you on the straight and narrow, question things, and I think it's a really healthy thing to have a good, solid board that just supports you, but when it needs to, just brings you back in the right direction or just nudges you in the right direction. And I think it's really important, to feel accountable to the board. And if you go into the board and you're just going to get roasted, you don't really feel it. You go in there in defensive mode. You don't feel accountable. You just go in there to get through the board. And I think going into a board where you actually feel you're accountable, you're presenting things, you're presenting decisions, you may be asking for advice on things. There's real value in that. If you go in just to defend yourself, you start losing the value, frankly.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point as well in terms of actually the direction of the relationship, and whether there's it's genuinely a consultative body rather than you are subservient to the people on it. Yeah. I think that's so important. I'm not quite sure where I stand on this one in terms of the ranking.
Yeah,
I think
one of two, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, were it to happen, I think that it could quite easily be business butcher unless it's unless that person is just somehow brilliant and they need to take control. But I think I'm going to go with Boardroom Vampire for that one.
You're going to go with Vampire. I think the thing is with you can, I mean, they're putting in a small amount of money, aren't they? So they're putting in a small amount. So technically, they don't really have, there's not an awful lot they can do unless you let them. They're not going to have major voting rights. They're not really, they're not, for the amount of money they're bringing in, they can't really have any expectations. But the fact they're asking for all these things, you can guarantee they're going to be a pain, isn't it? An absolute pain. I mean, the fact you're putting in a small amount of money and expecting all this stuff, they're going to be the guy that has a problem when you want to go to the next fund. They're going to be raising questions all over the place. Yeah, I think Boardroom Vampire, possibly even Oddball comes to mind. But, one of these two.
We're going to have to sort of, we can do some combined ones. I think because also like Backseat Founder, like definitely
all
Oddball.
of the above, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think it hits those three.
Yeah.
I don't know if it gets to Business Butcher because of
Maybe
exactly
not,
that. But no, great. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much.
Yeah, really good.
for
Good
coming
questions. It's really good scenarios, and I think the thing is, all of them as well. They're not uncommon. You can kind of recognise bits of all of them. So like I've heard bits of all of them before, and know people have experienced all of them, and it's a minefield out there. It really is a minefield.
Yeah, and if you're a founder out there listening to this, and you've come across these types of stories before, and you've gone through these. One, sorry, there are a lot of bad actors out there, and two, if you've got a story that you'd like to contribute anonymously to the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. We're planning to make a number of stories here, and really the purpose and the direction of this podcast is to share stories and essentially build pattern recognition, so that founders who haven't lived through these stories before can potentially recognize when they're entering into a dangerous situation, and hopefully end up with creating more value in the long run for having avoided these types of situations.
100%, and it's all about avoiding the slow no, and also the wrong slow yes, as quick as possible, for seeing those danger signs and saving time, saving yourself the heartbreak of it. So, all for it.
Where can people find you? And can you tell us a little bit more about your new venture, Venture Comet?
Sure. Well, LinkedIn, you can always look me up. Kevin Smith, easy to find, or venturecomet.com. Venture Comet is a platform that helps startups, scale-ups, smaller companies generally, but also growing companies to stay organized, understand your metrics, understand where you're going, understand how your business is developing, and really help you get in shape to go through those investment processes and those exit processes when they come around.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.